Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be sharing with you how I use my grayscale to color technique. This is a technique that I've used in the past couple of illustrations, notably the Super Metroid one, because that one is the most finished. It's probably the best example of it. I haven't been using this technique in the past couple of years because I wanted to solely focus on my approach with color, because I felt that my sense of color in my illustrations was a bit weaker. I tended to rely too much on the grayscale approach previous to that, and what I found was that a lot of my illustrations ended up looking a bit muddy because I just didn't understand enough about how the colors would interact value-wise, and I needed to build that muscle up. So I've been using it again because I find that you have a much quicker path to the finish in an illustration, which is important if you're doing a lot of production work and you work in video games, or you're just doing things for, comic cover illustrations, things like that. It's nice to have because it's speedy. It's speedy in the way that you establish all your values, light to dark, in the beginning before adding color, and it makes it like a pretty quick transition into the final piece. Because I find, at least for me, some of the harder stuff to do is to build your values up using straight color, because you have to understand the temperature, you have to understand kind of all of the different values interacting, as far as like cool versus warm colors interacting and that sort of thing. I mean, I feel it gets much easier to add that stuff once you have your grayscale painting down, as opposed to build it up in color and then change it as you go in color, because doing adjustments to a full color painting is really difficult. But if you have a grayscale painting done and you want to add whatever colors you want, they'll tend to read well just because all your values are in place, and you can kind of play with different hue shifts and changes and things like that. So it's nice for a lot of reasons, but specifically production wise, I find that it's the fastest at just knocking out illustrations that look pretty done. I'm going to do a really shitty drawing today just to kind of convey the idea of how I'm using this approach. This is not going to be emblematic of some amazing final illustration that's huge and detailed, but it'll get across the idea and the steps that I use, because otherwise it would take, hours and hours and hours to show you literally how I go through that. I spent, however many hours I spent on the Super Metroid piece would just take forever to show you, identifying like, oh, then I did this here. I could write that up and share that the way I did my previous Castlevania pieces, or Castlevania piece and the Morgan piece, but for the sake of brevity, I'm going to just show you here. So if you can catch it in this little tiny video of me, you'll see that I have baby sped up on my shirt. I'm pale. I haven't been sleeping much, but that is the life of a parent who just had a little baby and also has another baby. So it's pretty wild over here, but making things happen. Hopefully, this is good. I made some tea for myself. Okay. So first things first, I start out with pencil drawing. So pencil drawing being just something that feels like a pencil, doesn't need to be a pencil. It can be any brush you want. I don't need it to be this either. I just like it. But I'm using the pencil brush I got from, what's his name? They're the ones that come with Photoshop. You can actually go to the Photoshop website if you're subscribed and download them. I posted them just recently. Hold on, let me pause this so that I can actually tell you what I'm talking about. Kyle T. Webster is who I'm talking about. So Kyle T. Webster actually has his brushes for free. If you're already subscribed to Photoshop, you can just download them. So one of them that I liked is this pencil-y looking brush. Again, you don't even see this in my final illustrations in this approach. It's just something that I think it feels good when you're drawing. So let's just draw something stupid. Let's just do just a little, let's do a goblin. There you go. Starting to look like Shrek. Might be Shrek. Who knows if it's Shrek? He's got big eyes. I can't remember what... Does Shrek have ears and things on the side of his head? Or just things on the side of his head? I guess we're doing Shrek. Okay. So here's a really, really good drawing of Shrek. I know this is probably the most helpful approach that you can think to find for something like this. This is the example you want to see. There's a Shrek where his eyes are off. He hasn't slept. Okay, so now what I do is I flip the canvas, and aside from this pencil brush, I'm able to have all of these be available for download for you because they're from free brush packs. I made sure that I had all free stuff in this approach. I don't mean like I selected brushes that I wouldn't otherwise use. I mean that I just made sure that they were free brushes so that I could actually share them. This one I can't, I don't think, legally share because it's a Photoshop subscription thing, but you know. Okay, so I think these will be labeled for you the same way they are for me. I called this one an anime brush because I was trying to emulate this artist I saw on Twitter who did a lot of anime portraits, and I was like, how are they getting that line look? It's like a digital look, but it's smooth. It feels nice, but it doesn't have a lot of shape variation. So I was like, okay, this one looks the most like it. So I just named it Anime Brush because it reminded me of that person's artwork. All right, so first things first, I had that sketch layer. I'm gonna make a new layer. This is a multiply layer. And just using black and white for my foreground and background color, you can see it over here. I'm just going to press X on the keyboard to flip back and forth between black and white and paint in and out values. So I just start drawing. And I like this brush for this process because the pencil won't blend so well when you go over it painting. It tends to leave like that jaggedy pencil look behind, so you end up painting a lot of that out. But when you use a brush like this that's softer, it tends to blend with the process as it goes, so your lines look less rigid against the painting, if that makes any sense to you. So I'm just refining my sketch and working it in. I would obviously spend more time than this on a real illustration, but for the sake of example, here we are. Okay, so I have my lines down like that, right? So now I just make the brush slightly bigger and I start working in some values a bit. Let's have this Shrek be underlit. So I'm painting in and out with X, black and white. The brush is set to 100% opacity, by the way. So I'm just using the pressure sensitivity of my tablet to get different value shifts. So the nose is casting a shadow, and then you got the lip here casting a shadow. And you don't have to use the black and white, like as far as just X back and forth. You can do color picking and just kind of select gray tones that are there and work those in. I just like having black as mine because at least at this stage I can have that definite dark value there, because if I start to work in gray tones too much, I tend to get stuck in the gray tones too easily and I lose that high contrast that makes things pop. So I know that this looks really, really good, but don't let that distract you from the lesson here. I'm trying to help. You'd be so focused on how good this Shrek looks that you won't learn anything. My God. This is such a nightmare. It looks horrible. Oh. So, but you can see how easily I'm kind of working in my values. Okay. So the next thing I'll do after I do this is I'll start softening things up a bit. Okay, so as you can tell, I'm very happy with this. I think it looks great. So now I am going to start blending things up a bit better. So I make a new layer. I choose now the soft round brush that I'm providing for this post. And now I'm just using the eyedropper, so Alt on the keyboard. I'm just going to select values and blend. My opacity is set to 30%. The flow is set to 80% on this brush. And I'm just trying to get this stuff mostly blended just a little bit. Doesn't need to be perfect, but I'm trying to just make sure my shadows are reading and all that. The funny thing about this is I used to only render with this kind of soft round brush, but since then I have moved on to using more textural things and all that, so I try to vary it up a bit. Because this can look a bit crazy if it's too soft. You end up having to manually draw every single texture, which is what I used to do. It's part of the reason my paintings used to take me forever. And by forever, I mean like hundreds of hours kind of thing, if I wanted something that looked really real. So once you start to see your perfect Shrek coming to life like this, you'll know that you're on the right track. So if I have a bunch of characters in an illustration, I tend to do like the tight drawing. This isn't a tight drawing, but I will have done a tight drawing, and then I start to render, but I render the character alone. I don't usually render every single thing at once because it's overwhelming, especially something like the Super Metroid piece, because there's so much going on. It's easier for me to focus like this. So that's what I tend to do. I tend to do individual characters just one at a time so that it becomes a manageable thing for me. So at this stage, you can play with lighting a bit. We're not adding color yet, so whatever values we want to make this thing pop more, we can. So if I want to eyedrop the white of the background and start to brush it in as backlighting on Shrek, I can do that. And this will all translate pretty well to the color phase. So making sure that your lighting's all established here is important. And I tried to do as much of that as I can at this stage, where it's the easiest to do, at least to me. All right. So I could do way more with this and make it a real nightmare, but it's already pretty scary, so we can probably just keep going. Okay, so something that I'll do, you don't have to do this, but it's something that I like. I will add in a fill color behind this that basically can either be the color that you want for Shrek, or you can do this. So let me flatten these two layers so the shadow layer here, the blending one, and the line layer. So this is still a multiply, and then underneath it, let's go in and we'll start the layer as green just so you can see kind of what I'm doing. But also, I don't do grayscale the same way everybody else does. I'm just not that familiar with gradient maps, so I don't tend to use them. Every time I've tried to use them, I don't know, they just look too ugly to me. I must just not really understand them. But I've watched tutorials and then applied it, and I was like, not for me, I guess. I'm much quicker this way. Okay. So when I have this fill like this, I'm able to then have my values here separated from the background. So I made another layer beneath this kind of green fill, and you can see I can just kind of knock in a color, right? So super quick. And now what I was going to tell you is that I can take that fill layer, and if I just want to add another layer of values to just define out this character, I can create a new layer above that fill layer, turn it into a clipping mask, and now, just so that you can kind of see what I'm doing, I'm going to make that white again so you can kind of only read the values. And I'll make another layer that's still in this clipping mask area. And now using that soft round brush, since this line layer and value is set to multiply, I can select black. I'll turn the opacity down on the soft round to 10%, and I can just kind of start brushing in a little bit more value here underneath. So I do that sometimes just to kind of get some more variation in the values. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it to give you an idea if I want to go even further with that. All right. Terrifying. Okay. So now that I have this fill layer, I can start to add some color here. All right. So this is underneath this new value thing I just made. So these are all the base colors for this character. So I'm going to use that anime brush for fills. You don't have to do that. It's just something I'm doing. The eye color. And then just some variation on the skin, I guess, and then maybe a little bit on the body. Just do some clothing stuff. So I'm just adding some warm tones to the skin here. And then let's just add in the clothes real quick. So these are just straight color. I'm just choosing colors and letting the values above dictate how the light affects them. Okay, so now beyond this, I will now use different kinds of soft light layers to manipulate how I want these tones to shift. So I'm going to make a soft light, and now I want the shadows in here to fall a bit cooler. So I'm going to select kind of a darker blue tone. See if this is something we want to do. I'll set my brush opacity to 10% using that soft round brush. And I'm just going to brush into all the shadows so that I'm affecting how that grayscale looks. so that now all the shadows are cool. And now I'm going to make another soft light layer, and this one's going to be warm tones for the skin, so just some brighter orange or something like that. And I'm going to make the highlights here feel a bit warmer, whatever light is hitting Shrek in the face. Some swamp gas, who knows. Just a really simple color combination. So then I can just keep playing around with this variation of tones. I can make like warm around the edge of the shadow. Soft light layer again, and the soft round brush. Okay, so the final thing that I usually do with this stuff, there's not enough cool light in the eyes. I gotta add more of that in the shadow. Good enough. So the final thing that I do is I will do adjustments on this part. So as long as we're in here, we're in this mask, you know, this mask here. As long as we're in this, might as well adjust everything and make sure it's something we want. So I use a color balance layer. Let's see what we can do with that. Just adjusting the midtones. And then the highlights. And the shadows, we want darker blue. And then sometimes I use selective color and adjust things individually. So I can bump up the reds and that sort of thing, just to make sure that I'm in total control of how the hues shift around in the colors. Okay. So now I have this really terrifying Shrek. All right. So at this point, there's a couple things that I can do, and it depends on how meticulous I want to be. So one way I can go about this is I can just overtop everything, start painting using the values I've established. Or I can do something where I further adjust everything, which is where I take my fill layer here all the way up to the line and value layer, and I just flatten them together. So I probably want to flatten, I don't know why I flatten like that. It's a bit weird. Hold on. I don't know why it's not letting me flatten the whole thing at once. That's funny. Okay, so here you can see I just have everything together like this, and now what I can do is adjust this whole thing. So I can go back and do my selective color and adjust the dark values that I established. I can add red to them, I can do whatever. Just little things like that. So sometimes I do that to just get like an overall adjustment to it that also affects my value sketch over top. Okay. So nothing too crazy. All right. Now I make a new layer, and this is where I begin to do some rendering a bit. So I do a couple different things. I have my anime brush, which I render with that. I also have this hard round render, which gives me nice stark lines. I can do, you know, cuts and things and little details that are kind of like sharper. But in general, I keep things pretty soft because I'm just trying to get things looking nice and real as far as blending the forms goes. So I'm just using the eyedropper, selecting values that are already on the canvas, and then painting with those. And then if I want to add really intense highlights, I can always just use like white or something really bright like that and just start dropping it in and highlight areas just to make it extra scary. Bump up that light. So yeah, I'm just selecting tones that are already there and blending using that anime brush. But you can use whatever soft brush you like or rendering brush, doesn't really matter. You could render the whole thing with harder tones, it just depends on the style you're going for. I'm just going for something that's scary and quasi-real. One thing I think about a lot when I'm painting like this is I think about bounce light. So because everything's going that three-dimensional route, I want to make sure that if light is hitting the nose here, that it's also reflecting light down onto the upper lip area here. It also depends on the texture that it's going on. If it's going on a really like gritty texture, there's going to be less bounce light. If it's going off a really shiny texture, then there's going to be more, etc. That kind of stuff. So this Shrek is really shiny, so we want to make sure that he's shimmering. But this is pretty much what I do. This is the whole process of it. And then I just refine at this stage. Obviously, like I said, this is just a really bad drawing, but like if I actually spent the time with this and I had a good drawing to go off of and my values were realized with that drawing, then this would come together super quick and it would look pretty realish. Like you can already tell like at this stage, like as much as this sucks, it's like it still reads and it still comes together pretty quick. It's just a really easy approach for me to use. I think it's good for people who are starting out too, because it lets you focus on kind of one thing at a time as opposed to juggling everything with color. That's the reason I gravitated towards it in the beginning of my career, because it was such a approachable way of doing art digitally. I didn't have a whole lot of understanding of how to do things with color, and I didn't know color theory. So it was a much easier way for me to start my paintings and get something that looked a bit more real. And what I used to do, and what you can do too, is take artists that you really like and desaturate their images in Photoshop. You can just go to hue, saturation in the adjustments and then just adjust them down to being purely grayscale and read the values that are there. If you're having trouble establishing values from light to dark and getting something that looks halfway decent, then you probably want to start there. Just start looking at other people's artwork who you think have striking images and see what their value range looks like, and then just start from there, because that's all I did. I grabbed a bunch of artists I really liked, looked at their stuff like that, and then I was able to break down how they were doing that. In some cases, I literally went into their images and I did an eyedropper and just selected the values they already had in theirs and painted with them on mine until I was used to using values like that in my own work. But you can just see how quick this all is. Like it's not it's not the best thing in the world what I'm doing, but you know, as an example goes, This is one of them. Okay, so I can't share a bunch of texture brushes that I like because they're not mine. I have brushes from I have brushes from a bunch of artists, but some of the ones that I've been using lately is from Justin Gerard, and his texture brushes are pretty great. There's a lot though. There's a lot of options out there, a lot of free options too. But just to go off kind of brushes I've already been using, sometimes I use that kind of stuff while I'm doing this phase, just to get texture in there that isn't this soft round. Because if you don't mind the digital look, it's not too bad to have this soft round brush, because it definitely looks digital. But if you want something to look traditional, which is what I want, then you have to branch out and use some brushes that feel a bit more realistic. But even so, even if I'm going to use realistic rendery brushes, I do so after I've established my painting. So once I have all my values like this, that's when I start to use texture brushes. I don't do it like to build the values, because I find that building this is such a stupid illustration. I find that building values with all the soft brushes is really the quickest way for me to finish something. And then once I have all of these values down, I can blend between them with a textury brush, and that makes it look pretty good too. I can keep all the values that I've already put down, basically. Okay, so now I can use the soft round brush and just kind of blend the stuff that I've laid out. I like using a variety of brushes here, just the mix between that kind of hard round, soft round look. Because if you just use the soft round brush, like you could use this, but it would look really fluffy and airbrushy, and if that's something you're going for, then that's fine. But I want this character to have a more tactile feel. I don't want it to just be this really soft, puffy thing. So I try to make a distinction between the brush marks to give it some variation, so it isn't kind of a one note, one texture painting, because that can get old. You know, it doesn't add a lot of interest to your image. You want things to feel different throughout your painting. So this brush isn't one that's provided, but here's just an example of what I would use. This is one's from Justin Gerard. Okay, so what I would do is when things are looking a bit too digital, like in the nose here, right? I'll use this brush and I just kind of render between the values using the eyedropper. Because it's so easy to establish the values and get the forms reading well with the soft round in that kind of hard round, soft edge, that this is a way to basically select what you've done with that so that the forms are still there, but use a texture to blend between. It just feels a little bit better. I'm not doing the best job. Hopefully you get the idea. The only thing I really do after this, well, I finish it, that's obvious, but I will then do just little adjustments and things. So I'll flatten the character here and then just do more adjustments. So I can do more color balancing if I want. I can do more selective color. I can adjust the color contrast, things like that. So once I'm feeling pretty good about a piece, that's when I will do my little final kind of things with the piece. So I'm using my soft round brush. I'm going to set the opacity to 10% and the flow to right around 10%. And I just select highlight areas and add a little bit of a glow to them. Go to the edges, a little bit of glow. Just to lend some more atmosphere. You can kind of see what that looks like. It's subtle, but I find that it works really well in the finishing touches of a painting. Just really light blending things that give a bit more hue and glow. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the whole Grayscale approach. That's how I'm doing everything I'm doing now. And yeah, if you have any further questions on this, I can do subsequent videos that will explain a bit more in depth if you like. But I hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much for all your support. And if you would like to, again, know more about any of the pieces I've done, just let me know and I'll consider doing some kind of write-up or thing on it. I'll probably do one on the Super Metroid one because I felt like I learned quite a bit. I'll put up a GIF of the breakdown of how that image came together, as well as I'll probably do like a step-by-step thing so that you can see it, similar to how I did the Morrigan in the Castlevania piece. I think that this approach with what I'm doing is probably the fastest approach that I have. The other ones take me a bit longer, but I find that I learn a lot from them. When I come back to this, it's more like I'm playing around. So my brain, like whether or not this is easier for you, I don't know. But for me, this is kind of how my brain thinks as far as lighting and values go. So it's the easiest approach for me in particular. And now that I've had a bit more time studying and things in different approaches, I'm feeling okay coming back to doing something more real. And hopefully I'll be able to knock out a bunch of illustrations this year, which I think is going to be the case, because even though to me that Metroid piece felt like it was taking forever, I think it only ended up taking me around 12 days, which is nothing really in the grand scheme of things. And that's 12 days spread out across babies and chaos. So once my kid's actually about to go to school, so things should start to speed up a lot more. But yeah, thanks for all your support. I hope this was helpful, and I'll talk to you in another video soon. All right, good night or good day or wherever you are. I love you.